Chapter 126, No Help. Chen Lingyu continued, I'll help you manage the community using scientific management methods. If this model works well, it can even be expanded to other places. It's the end of the world, and all the systems in the world are in chaos. Even if we establish a kingdom, it won't be a problem. You can be the king, and I'll be your advisor. What do you think? Zhang Yi just smiled. After all, he was a graduate of Tianhai City University of Technology and had 5 years of social work experience. He wasn't about to be fooled by a woman who was involved in pyramid schemes. Not interested. Zhang Yi coldly dropped these 3 words, not intending to continue the discussion. But Chen Lingyu anxiously wanted to continue persuading him, but saw Zhang Yi wave his hand at her. No need to say anything else. We don't know each other well, and I don't want to hear your nonsense. Zhang Yi's determined gaze made Chen Lingyu's face darken, and she took 2 steps back as if she had lost all her strength. After last night's fight, this woman must have been scared. Rather than seeking Zhang Yi's cooperation, she was seeking his protection. But who was she? She wasn't pretty, she was a bit old, and she had no residual value. Zhang Yi had no reason to protect her. Chen Lingyu said sadly, if this continues, who knows when we'll die. Zhang Yi glanced at her and emphasized, take out the word we dot. You will die, but I, Zhang Yi, will not. Chen Lingyu shook her head helplessly. Zhang Yi looked at this woman who could barely be considered a strong woman and asked curiously, you're a woman, it's hard to survive alone in the end of the world. What, you don't have a husband? Chen Lingyu smiled bitterly and shook her head. We split up a long time ago. Oh, you're single. Chen Lingyu shook her head. Not really, I still have a daughter. She started studying abroad in the United States when she was 10 and attends a prestigious school. When she mentioned her daughter, Chen Lingyu's eyes lit up. I don't need to rely on men in my life. After the divorce, I raised my child on my own. I started out washing dishes and working as an apprentice at a beauty salon, and step by step, I worked my way up to become the president of a company that is about to go public. I'm no worse than any man. Zhang Yi, if you don't cooperate with me because of this, it will definitely be your loss. Chen Lingyu tried one last effort. Zhang Yi touched his nose and said slowly, generally speaking, only the head of a large corporation can be called president. The boss of a small company like yours can only be called general manager. Chen Lingyu's face immediately showed embarrassment. That's not necessarily true. No one says that the president can only be the boss of a large corporation. Zhang Yi was a little speechless. It seemed that Chen Lingyu's education level did not exceed junior high school. In a corporation, there are only shareholders, and president is just a job title. If you don't even understand such a basic corporate position, why pretend to be an entrepreneur? Never mind, you can go back to work. Zhang Yi walked around Chen Lingyu, not wanting to continue arguing with this woman who was involved in pyramid schemes. However, as he looked into the distance, he saw something that surprised him. Building 18, which was managed by Li Jian, was completely different from the other buildings. Li Jian was wrapped in a thick black down jacket and was working hard to shovel snow. He was short and unremarkable from a distance, but for some reason, Zhang Yi always felt that this man had a tenacious spirit. In front of Building 18, everyone was working together in an orderly manner. Everyone worked for 10 minutes and then took a break, before new people came to take over. Zhang Yi was deeply moved. He would never have dared to imagine such a scene in the apocalypse. Zhang Yi couldn't help but walk over and stand not far from Li Jian, quietly watching them work. Soon, Li Jian noticed Zhang Yi. He raised his head, the dark circles under his eyes very obvious, his whole body looking much thinner. Zhang Yi? Why are you here? Zhang Yi did not answer his question, but just glanced at the people from Building 18. Although they looked pale, there was a glimmer of light in their eyes. Unlike the people in other buildings, who were completely numb and living like walking corpses, they were different. Zhang Yi was a little relieved and asked Li Jian with some curiosity, how did you do it? Li Jian asked, what do you mean? Zhang Yi said, the other apartment buildings have been fighting fiercely over food distribution. But looking at your apartment building, there is no such situation. I'm curious, how did you manage to hide the news? A look of pride appeared on Li Jian's face. Although he was not tall, he still tried to stand up straight and said to Zhang Yi, I didn't hide any news at all. From the very beginning, I told everyone in our unit about the results of the negotiations. This result was beyond Zhang Yi's expectations. He was surprised that Li Jian dared to do so. Wasn't he afraid of internal unrest in the unit? Then, with only enough food for 10 people, it's impossible for all of you to survive. Why didn't they rebel? Li Jian seemed to have guessed that Zhang Yi would ask this question. He said calmly, no one in our building wants to become a beast. So if there are 10 meals, we'll divide them equally. If there's only 1 meal, we'll still divide it equally. Zhang Yi snorted and crossed his arms, saying mockingly, but the result will only be that all of you will die. Not a single person will survive. You think you're so smart, but in fact, you've made the most foolish choice. Li Jian fell silent for a moment, not knowing how to answer Zhang Yi's question. He understood that Zhang Yi was right. Between human nature and animal nature, the latter was clearly more suited to surviving in harsh environments. Zhang Yi shook his head, not intending to dwell on the issue. He had come here purely out of curiosity. He had no interest in the lives of these people. Seeing that Zhang Yi was about to leave, Li Jian hurriedly shouted, Zhang Yi, wait. Can you help us? Sorry, that's not possible. Zhang Yi's answer was very straightforward, leaving no room for negotiation. He looked down at the short middle-aged man in front of him and said indifferently, with your abilities, you could easily gather a group of the most promising survivors, divide the resources, and ensure you can live comfortably in the post-apocalyptic world. But you're hesitating, wanting everything. Yet you don't have the ability to protect everyone. What you're doing is no different from committing a crime. You chose your own path, so you'll have to walk it alone. Chapter 127, Hooked. Zhang Yi ignored Li Jian's request, turned around and left. Li Jian was a typical idealist. However, to realize one's ideals, one needs strength, not just slogans. Returning to Building 25, he happened to pass by Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang. The two were holding cigarettes in their hands, eager to smoke them. As soon as they saw Zhang Yi, they immediately came over with flattering expressions on their faces. Brother Zhang, aren't you going out today? Or did you finish collecting food yesterday? Wang Chang walked over with a smile, looking very enthusiastic. If you didn't know him, you would think he was Zhang Yi's cousin. I'll go out later, Zhang Yi said with a smile. Huang Tianfang also walked over and said with a smile, Zhang Yi is the person who contributes the most to our community. Unlike these useless people, he pointed at the residents who were sweeping snow, they can't even do their jobs properly, all they know is how to ask for food. Humph. Zhang Yi laughed and said, they don't know how to work, you teach them. Wang Chang looked at the obedient residents he had tamed and sneered, they all have 2 arms and 2 legs, what can't they do? Beat them up and they'll be obedient. As he spoke, he turned to Zhang Yi with a playful smile and said, Brother Zhang, I'm not used to smoking these Jinwan cigarettes, they're too strong. Can you get me some yushi next time? Huang Tianfang said, Yushi again? Why don't you want Zhonghua? You should be grateful that you have something to smoke. Don't add to Zhang Yi's burden. Zhang Yi smiled and said, that's not a big deal. I'll help you find some more. If I find any, I'll bring it to you. It shouldn't be difficult. Besides, at this time, cigarettes are precious, but there's no such thing as valuable or worthless. If you want me to find Yushi or Zhonghua, that's fine. But if you make me go find Dujiang or Hongsanwang for you, I wouldn't even know where to start. The 3 of them burst into laughter, the atmosphere very harmonious. By the way, I'll show you some good wine next time. If there's any left, I'll bring you a bottle or 2. It's freezing out there, a little wine will warm you up. When Zhang Yi said this, Huang Tianfang and Wang Chang were both very excited. Huang Tianfang loved drinking, and Wang Chang could hold his liquor well. Loving to drink was one thing, but the key was that in this weather, wine could help them keep warm, so it was a really good thing. Brother Jean, you are so righteous. I was wrong to judge you by my own standards. In the future, if you need anything, just let us know. Wang Chang gave Zhang Yi a thumbs up. He was truly touched. Huang Tianfang glanced at him and didn't want to be outdone. Zhang Yi, you are our savior. We can never repay you for saving our lives. From now on, I, Huang Deshang, will entrust my 140 pounds to you. Zhang Yi smiled warmly and patted them on the arm. Don't say that. From now on, we are the greatest partners. We are all trying to survive in this apocalyptic world, and only by working together can we achieve a win-win situation. If you need anything, just let me know. If I can help, I will definitely do so. After saying that, Zhang Yi pointed outside and said, I'm going out first. Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang quickly said, Go ahead, go ahead. Zhang Yi smiled and nodded, then went to get his vehicle and left the Yuelu neighborhood. Huang Tianfang and Wang Chang stared at Zhang Yi's departing figure, their expressions slightly complicated. The two glanced at each other, not quite sure how to deal with him, then turned and left. On the way back, Wang Chang lowered his head and pondered, why did Zhang Yi suddenly become so nice? He gave me cigarettes and even offered to bring me wine. Could I have misunderstood him before? He frowned and thought carefully. In the past, he had never had any contact with Zhang Yi, let alone any conflicts. After the apocalypse, he coveted Zhang Yi's snowmobile, sent people to steal it, and then sent people to ambush them in the snow. It was only then that Zhang Yi counterattacked the Wild Wolf gang. Wang Chang slapped his forehead and said, Oh my God. Come to think of it, it's not that he's unrighteous, it's that I did something wrong first. This Zhang Yi is a good guy, we can get along. A cruel smile gradually appeared on the corner of his mouth. I like people who are generous. On the other side, Huang Tianfang was also thinking about Zhang Yi's change in attitude. Why is he suddenly being nice to me? Logically speaking, with his strength, he shouldn't be afraid of me. That being the case, he's probably sincere about wanting peace and doesn't want to fight anymore. After all, he's just one person, and his men aren't all on the same page as him. If we keep fighting, he might die one day. That's why he's scared. After pondering it for a while, Huang Tianfang thought he understood Zhang Yi's change in attitude. He couldn't help but smile smugly. This is good news. After Zhang Yi came out, he went to the library again. The book Norwegian Wood was very interesting. The lingering sadness in Murakami Haruki's writing could be described as representative of the post-war culture of mourning. Zhang Yi slowly read the entire book, gently closed it, and put it back on the bookshelf. It wasn't that he was being pretentious, but it was rare for him to feel like reading a book, so he might not feel like it again in the future. There was no need to take it back to the library and let it gather dust in dimensional space. Zhang Yi was the type of person who wanted to buy every book he saw in a bookstore, but once he took them home, he lost interest. He raised his wrist and took his Rolex watch out of his sleeve. It was already 4 p.m., and as usual, he should go collect some food and take it back to the community. Zhang Yi muttered, I wonder when those guys will fall for it. I have to slowly lower their guard and then find the right opportunity to strike. Zhang Yi left the library, went to the supermarket to collect the necessary supplies, and then rode his snowmobile back to the neighborhood. Among the people who came to collect supplies today, there were a few more apartment building leaders. Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang were both in the crowd, looking expectantly at the burlap bag at Zhang Yi's feet. Their target was, of course, the cigarettes and white wine that Zhang Yi had promised to bring back for them. The reason they came to get it themselves was so that they could keep it all for themselves. Otherwise, these rare goodies would easily cause conflict between them and their men. Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang knew this very well. When they got the cigarettes yesterday, their men were already getting restless. When they saw them come to get the food themselves, a faint smile appeared on Zhang Yi's lips. Okay, everyone line up in order and come forward to get your food. When the floor leader of Building 1 walked over, he suddenly whispered to Zhang Yi, you're bringing cigarettes to Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang, can you bring some for us too? Chapter 128, Closing the Net. It was no secret that Huang Tianfang and Wang Chang smoked. After all, these two men were not good at hiding things. When others were working, they would smoke outside as if no one was there. After thinking about it for a moment, everyone guessed that Zhang Yi was the one who provided them with cigarettes. So, some of the building leaders who were addicted to smoking asked Zhang Yi to bring them cigarettes as well. Zhang Yi hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said, "It might be a little difficult to provide enough for so many people." The other building leaders immediately became anxious. "Zhang Yi, you can't play favorites. Our request isn't that high, just 1 pack a day, just 1 pack. This is the request of my life." Zhang Yi sighed helplessly. "All right, I'll try my best to provide them for you. How about this, starting tomorrow, I'll give cigarettes to those of you building leaders who want them." Seeing this, the non-smokers couldn't help but come forward and make their own requests. "I don't smoke, I just like to chew betel nut. Can you fulfill this request? I want to drink some alcohol, even the cheapest loose wine is fine." Zhang Yi said helplessly, Okay, I'll write down everything you said. I won't favor some over others, everyone will get their share." Everyone smiled happily and left with their supplies. After they left, Li Chengbin, Jiang Lei, and the others were filled with resentment. "Brother Zhang, aren't you being too nice to them? Giving them food is already a huge favor, and now they're taking advantage of us, asking for this and that." Zhang Yi said indifferently, "Their requests aren't excessive, and I can't treat some people better than others. It's fine, let's just leave it at that." Everyone looked at Zhang Yi as if he were a stranger. They couldn't believe that the ruthless and merciless Zhang Yi of the past could become so weak at this moment. But since Zhang Yi had gone to get the supplies himself, they couldn't say anything. After distributing the supplies to everyone, Zhang Yi returned home. He took a hot shower, then lay down comfortably on the sofa in his pajamas, staring at the ceiling above him. It's about time. The internal strife had already caused heavy losses to the other apartment buildings. More than 400 people had died. Hundreds more had been injured in the fighting, and it was unlikely that they would survive. Even if they did, they would pose no threat in the short term. Zhang Yi had made a special trip around the community that morning to observe how many people were still active. There were about 700. He had also used cigarettes and white wine as bait to lure the building leaders out of their apartments. In other words, it was time to close the net. Zhang Yi did not intend to delay any longer. There would be no major conflicts in the apartment buildings in the short term, so there was no point in delaying. Moreover, the food he had provided would allow those people to regain their strength. In a little while, they would pose an even greater threat to Zhang Yi. Tomorrow. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes slightly, and a flash of cold murderous intent flashed between his eyes. The next day, Zhang Yi left the neighborhood as usual. He didn't tell anyone about his plan for today, not even Uncle Yu. This operation was very important, and if he missed it, it would increase the difficulty and risk of the rest of the operation. Therefore, Zhang Yi couldn't trust anyone. After leaving the residential area, he went straight to the supermarket. He found a large amount of food on the shelves, most of which were loose steamed buns, dumplings, and bags of bread tied with strings. Today, Zhang Yi specially found food that was of better quality than the previous days and bought more of it. "I guess I'm being kind to them by letting them have a hearty last meal," Zhang Yi said. After piling up a large amount of food, Zhang Yi took out the rat poison he had obtained earlier from the dimensional space. It was a colorless and odorless powder, and just a small amount was enough to be lethal. Fortunately, the food had gone bad and its color was abnormal, so the powder would not be noticeable when sprinkled on it. Zhang Yi took the gas mask he found in the military camp out of the space and put it on, then carefully sprinkled the rat poison on the food. This process took him half an hour to complete. Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang and those guys might not trust the food and will have someone test it for poison. But they are so greedy, they definitely won't want to share their cigarettes and white wine with others. Old smokers and drunkards lose their usual caution when faced with these things. I'll put the poison in these. Zhang Yi took a few packs of cigarettes, thought for a moment, and then removed the plastic seal. When he gave them to Wang Chang and the others before, he had removed the plastic seal, of course, in preparation for today. This was to dispel their suspicions. After all, it was already good enough to get cigarettes, so it was not surprising that there were some problems with the packaging. Then, he carefully put the rat poison into the cigarettes little by little. As for the white wine, the method was a little more complicated. Zhang Yi first mixed the rat poison into the alcohol, then used a syringe to inject it through the bottle stopper. How could he put it? It was a bit rough, but it was already nightfall when he returned, and it was pitch black outside. Those drunks would hardly notice such a small flaw. After 2 hours of busy work, Zhang Yi began to pack the food into bags and put them on the sled behind the snowmobile. It wasn't snowing as heavily today, but the wind was still fierce. Zhang Yi leaned against the wall of the shopping mall and finally lit a cigarette, taking small puffs. If he took too big a puff, the cold air would easily freeze his lungs. Maybe today will be the end. I feel like this process has been a little too smooth. Zhang Yi muttered to himself. Everything that the people in the other units had done so far was exactly as Zhang Yi had expected. But it was precisely this cooperation that gave Zhang Yi a feeling of unease. I feel like everything is going too smoothly. Other people aren't stupid. How could they let me play them like this? Zhang Yi smiled wryly and narrowed his eyes. This false harmony is only temporary. Those guys aren't stupid. They'll strike at me sooner or later. The reason they're holding back is because they're waiting for an opportunity, right? There's a mole in Building 25, but I haven't been able to find out who it is. Is he still alive, or did he die a while ago? Zhang Yi asked himself these questions, but he couldn't find the answers. He wasn't Sherlock Holmes or Detective Conan, and he didn't have such powerful detective skills. However, he had something better in this apocalyptic world. He had a fortress and guns. Zhang Yi threw the cigarette he had taken 2 puffs of on the ground and crushed it with his foot. No matter what your plans are, in the face of absolute power, all your plots and schemes are meaningless. Chapter 129, First Strike, Counterattack. After everything was ready, Zhang Yi took the specially prepared food and rode his snowmobile back to the Yuelu neighborhood. Upon arriving at the Yuelu neighborhood, Zhang Yi first called Uncle Yu, Jiang Lei, Li Qingbin, and the others on the phone and asked them to maintain order at the scene. Soon, they arrived at the center of the community courtyard with iron rods, shovels, kitchen knives, and other tools. Zhang Yi, we're here. Zhang Yi glanced at Uncle Yu and the others and nodded. Okay, wait here. I'll call them down to get the things. Zhang Yi picked up his cell phone and notified the people in the group chat for the building leaders to come over. Uncle Yu stood beside him with an iron rod in his hand, looking like a loyal guard. Li Qingbin and Jiang Lei led their people to stand on both sides of Zhang Yi, slightly behind him, protecting him in the center. Zhang Yi glanced at them out of the corner of his eye. Today, Li Qingbin and Jiang Lei seemed more focused than usual. Out of self-preservation, Zhang Yi took a few steps back to position himself behind the crowd. Before long, representatives from each apartment building arrived at the scene one after another. Seeing that group of people, a smile flashed across Zhang Yi's eyes. His plan had succeeded. Using rare items such as cigarettes and alcohol, he had successfully lured the building leaders out, except for Li Jian from Building 18. That guy seemed to be sticking to his sense of fairness and was unwilling to come and get the items himself. Zhang Yi didn't care, as long as most of the building leaders came. The cigarettes and alcohol they had retrieved were all stuffed with large doses of rat poison. Once ingested, it would take 10 to 30 minutes to kill them. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes and smiled. All right, everyone, come and get your things. Starting from Building 1, Zhang Yi threw the supplies 2 or 3 meters away on the ground and let the representatives of each building come and get them themselves. One by one, the representatives came over and took their belongings. Building 21. Zhang Yi shouted, looking at Wang Chang. Wang Chang walked over with his head down, and Zhang Yi bent down to pick up a bag of food from the ground. Just as he was about to get up, a loud shout suddenly rang out, "Move!" Wang Chang took a pistol out of his pocket, aimed at Zhang Yi, and pulled the trigger. Zhang Yi's pupils suddenly contracted, and he subconsciously tried to dodge. At this moment, Uncle Yu, who was in front of him, suddenly pushed him away. Bang! 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 3 gunshots rang out in Zhang Yi's ears. The sudden attack made him feel that the interval between the 3 shots was incredibly long. Uncle Yu's body slowly went limp, and he bent his knees and fell to the ground. A shrill buzzing sound rang in Zhang Yi's ears. He raised his head and saw a group of people with fierce expressions rushing towards him. Wang Chang was holding a pistol, Huang Tianfang had pulled a kitchen knife from his chest. And less than 2 meters in front of him were Li Chengbin and Jiang Lei. There were more than 30 people present, and at least half of them were rushing towards Zhang Yi, their weapons glinting coldly. They had waited a long time for this moment. Zhang Yi wanted to paralyze them and then find an opportunity to wipe them all out. But they were fed up with Zhang Yi and wanted to kill him. The reason was that Zhang Yi was the strongest person in the entire neighborhood, and as long as he was alive, anyone else could be killed at any time. Moreover, someone had told them that Zhang Yi's house was a perfect shelter with a comfortable environment and plenty of food. No matter what their purpose was, they couldn't allow such a powerful person to exist in the Yuelu neighborhood. At this moment, there were so many of them together, and even Jiang Lei and Li Chengbin, who were by Zhang Yi's side, had been bribed by them. They believed that Zhang Yi was doomed. Even if he had a gun, how many people could he kill at such a close range? At this moment, Zhang Yi saw Uncle Yu slowly falling to the ground and his fierce enemies. His eyes gradually became terrifying. He hadn't told anyone about today's plan, not even Uncle Yu. Uncle Yu was even more unaware that Zhang Yi was wearing a bulletproof vest and bulletproof pants. Originally, even if those 3 bullets had hit Zhang Yi, he would have been fine. But out of gratitude to Zhang Yi, Uncle Yu didn't hesitate to block the 3 bullets for him. This made Zhang Yi feel guilty for the first time since the end of the world. What followed was a raging fire of anger. Jiang Lei was closest to Zhang Yi. He roared and swung the shovel in his hand at Zhang Yi's head. Zhang Yi quickly rolled on the ground a few times and hid behind the snowmobile. He adjusted his posture and got up from the ground. A combat assault rifle suddenly appeared in his hand. It was loaded with bullets. The expressions on the faces of the people who were still charging at Zhang Yi changed from fierce anger to shock, and eventually turned into fear. Bang, 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 bang. Facing a life-threatening situation, Zhang Yi clenched the trigger tightly, held the gun firmly with one hand, and started firing. In the blink of an eye, Li Chengbin and Jiang Lei, who were closest to him, had more than a dozen bullet holes in their bodies. Zhang Yi couldn't care less about anything else at that moment. He just fired at anyone who was standing. Behind Li Chengbin and Jiang Lei, there were a dozen or so members of the patrol team. They had been stunned since Wang Chang fired the first shot, seemingly unaware of what was happening. They hadn't followed Li Chengbin and Jiang Lei in attacking Zhang Yi. But when the bullets swept through their bodies, there was no difference. There were too many enemies in front of him, and Zhang Yi didn't have time to distinguish who was trying to kill him. He could only assume that all of them had to die. Better to kill the wrong person than let the right person go. That was Zhang Yi's first rule for survival in the apocalypse. The people in front of him fell and rose, and even the arrogant and domineering wild wolf gang leader Wang Chang didn't have time to get close to Zhang Yi before he was riddled with bullets. Before he died, his eyes were still filled with disbelief. He couldn't understand where Zhang Yi had gotten that assault rifle. If it weren't for that assault rifle, they would have won. That pistol gave him the courage to be arrogant. But just as Zhang Yi didn't know that he was hiding a pistol, he also didn't know that Zhang Yi had bulletproof vests and assault rifles. The difference was that although Zhang Yi didn't know he had a gun, he was prepared to deal with one. Therefore, Wang Chang had no chance of winning from the start. He has a rifle, how could he have a rifle? Run! Huang Tianfang was so scared that his legs went numb. He dropped the kitchen knife in his hand and turned to run. The other building leaders were also scared and screamed, turning their heads and running back. At this moment, they only regretted that their parents hadn't given them 2 more legs. Zhang Yi was already blinded by rage. He saw Uncle Yu's blood staining the snow red and his whole body motionless. He might already be dead. Even though Zhang Yi was ruthless, he was not a cold-blooded animal. He couldn't help but be affected. "Uncle Yu, thank you for blocking the bullets for me. I will avenge you and kill every last one of them," Zhang Yi said coldly. Since the end of the world, this was the first time he had faced so many opponents, but the result of the battle was a one-sided massacre. Just as Zhang Yi had said before, in the face of absolute power, all schemes and tricks were meaningless. Chapter 130, not a single one left. The bullets in the magazine were quickly used up, and Zhang Yi didn't have time to reload, so he threw the assault rifle on the ground. Then he pulled 2 handguns from his waist. There was no way the people in the snow could run fast, and Zhang Yi shot them all in the head, killing them instantly. In less than 20 seconds, almost everyone at the scene was dead. The few remaining people stood trembling in the snow, raising their hands high, their faces full of fear and desperation. "Zhang Yi, we're not their accomplices, we have nothing to do with this. I swear this has nothing to do with us. Don't kill me." Zhang Yi remembered these building leaders. When Wang Chang and the others had started, they hadn't made a move. Therefore, it was highly unlikely that they had anything to do with this incident. So, Zhang Yi pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 The heads of several building leaders were instantly blown apart, and they collapsed onto the snow. Zhang Yi aimed his gun at the last person still alive, the leader of Building 9, Chen Lingyu. Chen Lingyu was so scared that she wet herself, crying and sniveling. "Zhang Yi, I really have nothing to do with this. I beg you to believe me. I have a 13-year-old daughter who is abroad. I have to live to wait for her to come back." Zhang Yi looked at her coldly and remained silent for 2 seconds before firing a shot that took her life. The white snow was now stained red with blood. Only Zhang Yi was standing there, surrounded by more than 40 bodies lying in all directions. Even in the end of the world, it was the first time Zhang Yi had killed so many people at once. He knew that not all of these people were involved in the plot to kill him. For example, Chen Lingyu and the other members of the patrol team. But Zhang Yi had no choice. He couldn't allow anyone who was suspected of trying to kill him a chance to live. If he let them go today, they would surely become potential enemies in the future. Dead people were the safest. "You're all going to die sooner or later, so why not let me send you to heaven and save you the trouble of living such a hard life?" Zhang Yi held the gun in his hand and exhaled a puff of white smoke. "From this perspective, I'm helping you escape your suffering, so you should thank me. If these dead neighbors knew, they would probably say, 'I can't thank you enough.'" After killing all his enemies, Zhang Yi glanced around. The intense gunfire had attracted all the neighbors. They were leaning against their windows, watching the cruel battlefield, their eyes filled with awe for Zhang Yi. Some people felt relieved and grateful for everything Zhang Yi had done. Zhang Yi's gaze fell on buildings 26 and 21, which were the territories of the Tiana gang and the Wild Wolf gang. Wang Chang and Huang Tianfang couldn't escape. They were the first to attack Zhang Yi. Their men were already at the doors, waiting for their bosses to make the first move so they could come in and grab the supplies. But when Zhang Yi took out the black M4 carbine, they were terrified. Zhang Yi's gaze made them even more afraid. Xiao Lu, the second in command of the Wild Wolf gang, was cold all over and retreated with a trembling voice, "Retreat, retreat. Don't bring that devil over here." A group of frightened little henchmen panicked and fled into the hallway. Zhang Yi ignored them and walked straight up to Uncle Yu. Not far away, the bodies of Li Qingbin and Jiang Lei lay on the ground, with more than a dozen holes in their bodies still oozing blood. These 2 men had once been Zhang Yi's loyal henchmen, helping him fight many battles. But now, for some reason, they had betrayed him. However, Zhang Yi didn't care. He thought it was normal for anyone to betray him, even Uncle Yu and Zhou Qi. But after today, Uncle Yu's status in Zhang Yi's heart would become even greater. At the very least, he was now worthy of being entrusted with some important things. "Uncle Yu, are you still alive?" Zhang Yi crouched down, looking around to make sure no one was coming to ambush him, while testing Uncle Yu's pulse. No pulse. Zhang Yi was shocked. But soon, he remembered that he was wearing cut-resistant gloves, so it was impossible to feel a pulse. Zhang Yi had no choice but to turn his body over. There were 3 clear traces of blood on Uncle Yu's body. The bullet didn't hit his heart, but Zhang Yi didn't know if he could still be saved. But no matter what, Zhang Yi had to try. After all, even if Uncle Yu died, he would feel much less ashamed. He took a tube of adrenaline from the dimensional space and stabbed it into Uncle Yu's chest. Then, he yelled towards Building 25, "Come and help." At the door of Building 25, a group of neighbors stood there trembling with fear. They were all scared shitless by Zhang Yi's godlike performance just now and didn't dare to come close even now. Zhang Yi's cold gaze swept over all of them, startling them out of their shock. The group of people who were afraid of Zhang Yi quickly ran over to help. "Carry him up and take him to my house. Be gentle, if you bump or drop him, I'll burn you as paper offerings for Uncle Yu." With Zhang Yi saying that, how could the neighbors dare not be careful? They carried Uncle Yu more carefully than they would have carried their own fathers. Zhang Yi held his gun in both hands and followed closely behind them. When they arrived at the 7th floor, everyone suddenly heard a burst of crying. Brother Yu, what's wrong? You can't die. If something happens to you, how will my child and I live?" They saw Xiaolime hugging her child and running down the stairs, crying her eyes out. Zhang Yi noticed that when Xiaolime cried, Uncle Yu's eyelids seemed to loosen a little. Zhang Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart, "Old Yu, you're too kind." But then again, if you weren't so kind and righteous, maybe you would have been the first person I killed. Anyone who couldn't be useful to him but was skilled would become a huge threat. Zhang Yi had to kill them. However, now that Zhang Yi owed Uncle Yu a huge favor, he couldn't get angry at Xiaolime. The neighbors knew about the relationship between Xiaolime and Uncle Yu, so they all made way for her. Xiaolime carried her child to Uncle Yu and deliberately stood close to Zhang Yi, then started crying loudly. "My husband! Open your eyes and look at me. I'm Lime, you promised to marry me. And our baby, you said you wanted to see her grow up to be 18. And then the apocalypse would be over, and the 3 of us could live happily ever after. My husband!" She shouted in a 5-second prolonged cry. "How can you go back on your word? If you leave, how will the 2 of us survive? Why not just take us with you? What are you trying to prove? Helping someone else take a bullet makes you look heroic, but how can you face us, a widow and her child?" Zhang Yi got goosebumps listening to this. Xiaolime didn't mention him once, but every sentence was about her. On the surface, Xiaolime was crying for Uncle Yu, but in reality, she was telling Zhang Yi, "Uncle Yu took the bullet for you, so if anything happens to him, you have to take care of us."